Bris Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman Zachona Livracha. We were hoping, we just got back from the States yesterday morning, and to talk about the contrast between 2 days ago's New York temperature of -12 and Shabbos' temperature in Florida of 28. Quite a contrast in the same country. I tried my best to explain to them that they're in the wrong country. I tried. And I'm happy to say that many, many people are seriously considering Aliyah, much more so than I've ever experienced in the past. And some people are actually coming. It's, yeah. So we're going to do two things today, Mitzvah Hashem. First half will be the wrap-up, thank you very much, the wrap-up from the Shabbos series. And then we're going to do Hanerot Halalu from the Hanukkah for tonight. And next week, Mitzvah Hashem, Mosor. Hoshaná. I remember as a teacher in junior and senior high school here in Eretz Israel, the subject that's probably most difficult to teach is dinim, halakha, because many times it's taught in the most boring fashion. The books that are classic weren't really meant as syllabus material for 7th and 8th graders, whether it's the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch of Reb Shlomo Gansfried or the Chayei Adam of that precedes the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Many of these books are even the most modern ones, and they're already good modern ones, whether it's Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata of Rav Neuvert or the Rav Chaim David Alevi, the late chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, in his Selech Harav and Shulchan Aruch of his, what he did. They're good books, but they're good books to look up things if you have a circumstance, a situation, but use it as a text in a classroom. My daughter told me when she was in the Choref school, in high school, so they simply assigned chapters, and on Sunday they had a quiz, a bochan. So that means the teacher was just copying out. That's not really teaching, to make the kids just read the material and then test them on it and so on. And I understand why they did this. So I tried to develop more exciting ways of bringing the message of the halakha, and somehow get the halakha in the back way. It's almost like putting the pill in applesauce. You know, you have to sweeten the pill a little bit and get them to swallow it somehow. And the two modes that worked, one was Shelot Utshuvot, using responsa literature. And if you start with a Rav Moshe Feinstein letter, and the question was asked about the usage of solar panels for hot water for Shabbat, that's a legitimate question. You're not going to find the Rambam talking about it. You're not going to find the Shulchan Aruch dealing with it. It's a modern day question of Dut Shemesh. Can you use the hot water? What the issues are. So you get the question, you get the discussion, you get the sources, and you get the bottom line. It's an unbelievable way to expose kids to the laws of bishul, of cooking on Shabbat. It's really actually sensational. And through the discussion of Rav Moshe Feinstein, you bring out the books and you have them look up this and look up that, and it becomes an exercise, a type of laboratory exercise where you're redoing what a posek would do. So each posek has his own style, beseda, that's okay, but that was one of the things that I would use to teach dinim. And the second was poetry. Because a poem reads nicely, especially a poem that we traditionally sing at some occasion, and all of a sudden we find out that the poem is nothing but a poetic rendition of halachot. And therefore, these poems also become very, very useful tool for teaching dinim. And I feel not only for 7th graders, but also for adults. It's just a wonderful means. I'll give you an example. There's a long-winded poem by Reb Yosef Tov Elem. He's from the 12th century Ashkenaz, one of the Balei HaTosfot, who composed a poem about all of Dinei Pesach. Now, Dinei Pesach, there are numerous Dinei Pesach. There's no wonder the Chazal say that annually we should review the laws of Pesach a month before Pesach. Sholim v'dorshim b'lchot Pesach kodem Pesach shloshim yom. We know why, because they're very, very difficult and sometimes very, very deep and detailed and so on. So here you have a poem from the beginning of Bidikat Chametz until the end of the Seder, and it's a long-winded poem that was introduced as part of the Siddur of Shabbat HaGadol for those communities that say the piyutim, what we call yotzrot. Here in Eretz Yisrael, thanks to the Vilna Gaon, nobody says it because he said it was one big hefsek, one big interruption in Chazarat HaShatz. And that's why Minhag Eretz Yisrael is to delete all these yotzrot. But I remember in Chutz La'aretz we said the yotzrot, and on Shabbat HaGadol for Shacharit, it was quite a lengthy poem, and the people just, without even taking note what they were reading. And that poem, Elokei Aruchot L'chol Basar, goes through all of Dinei Pesach. There can be no greater text to put on the table for a 7th grader than to read a poem about Dinei Pesach. And then you get everything in, and those areas that you want to zoom in and open up a Mishnah, open up a Gemara, open up a Rambam, open up a Shulchan Aruch, you do that. But you don't have to focus on everything, but at least you get across the board the entire gamut of Dinei Pesach. So you have that, or Rav Sadia Gaon's poem that the Sfaradim until this very day say on Shavuot morning, it's all of the 613 mitzvot. A poem of the 613 mitzvot, which is phenomenal. Of course, what's very phenomenal is that all of a sudden you see that it includes the reading of the Megillah and Purim and the lighting of the Hanukkah candles, and this the Rambam, had a canary on this, and one of the reasons that he writes his book of mitzvot is to set the record straight that there are no rabbinic add-ons in the listing of the 613 of the Taryag. But Rav Sadia Gaon is not the only one. Preceding the Rav Sadia Gaon, you have the Halachot Gedolot, who also included the lighting of Hanukkah candles and reading of the Megillah, which does not mean that they believed that Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Sinai and said there's a mitzvah to light Hanukkah candles on the 25th of Kislev, but hold off for 1400 years until we begin this mitzvah. That's not the way it went. They believe that the number 613 is not from Sinai, but it's just the sum total of biblical and rabbinic mitzvot, and therefore they have to, contract and condense the other list so that they have room for at least 7 rabbinic add-ons that they want to include in the Taryag. But the Rambam challenges this whole thing, and he believes the number 613 is from Sinai, and he believes, therefore, there can be no rabbinic add-ons in the list. So much so, when he begins the Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, he says he's going to talk about, he always gives a title, and then he tells us how many mitzvot he's going to talk about in that unit, and that's it. So he writes, mitzvot, Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, Yesh ba shtei mitzvot aseh midivrei sofrim. There are 2 rabbinic mitzvot. And then he writes, ve'eino min haminyan. They're not part of the counting. And Rambam talks about divrei sofrim all the time and never says ve'eino min haminyan. They're not part. The reason that he adds it in this particular point, it's a polemical comment to give a knack at those who think that Hanukkah and Purim should be included in the 613. And in my next presentation on the Rambam, because there's life after a book, it's going to be on redundancies in the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam to show that these are polemical inserts and not what many great people thought. The Rambam subliminally was giving us added halachot. I don't believe that's true. I believe the Rambam repeated himself sometimes, so against the background of known views that he challenged. And therefore, he wanted to make the point, he restates it. And here he says very, very categorically, ve'eino min haminyan, not part of the counting. Okay, and therefore, we're going to look at Om Nitzorah. Let me just say, Om Nitzorah. This is the poem that said, it's the second poem on the page of Yom Zeh Mechubad. The Hoshaná that we say on Chag Sukkot. And we're not out of sync here, so let me just say one word about the connection between Sukkot and Chanukah. There is a Kabbalistic idea. It's mentioned in the Sefer HaToda'ah of Kitov, Eliyahu Kitov, but in Eliyahu Kitov's book, it's a popular book, and there are no footnotes, so you don't even know where he says Hamukubalim Omrim. In the Kabbalist writings, you have the following, that corresponding to the three biblical Yomim Tovim, the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, there are three parallel rabbinic Chagim, and they are, and each one corresponds to the Shalosh Regalim. So Shavuot, of all things in this Kabbalistic realm, corresponds to Purim, or rather Purim corresponds to Shavuot. How does Purim correspond to Shavuot? Because Purim is Kimu v'Kiblu. They accepted, and Chazal say, Kimu v'mashe kiblu kvar. They accepted what once upon a time they accepted. So you have a type of rededication to Ma'amad Har Sinai in the aftermath of Purim. Kimu mashe kiblu kvar. So that's why the Kabbalists say that Purim is a corollary, if you may, to Shavuot. And then they say that Sukkot and Hanukkah go together. Hanukkah is a corollary. Why? Because Sukkot is the concept of protection from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Chazal say that the reason why on the phrase Leman yedu dorotechem ki vasukot toshavti et bnei Yisrael botzi otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, that we sit in the sukkah to remind us of the Sukkot. So one opinion says, yes, we sat in Butgalach, in booths. So that's that. The other is that the sukkah reminds us of the Ananei HaKavod, the spiritual cloud that hovered over Am Yisrael, which basically meant divine protection. So I'll just tell you parenthetically, I don't even know if I mentioned this here already, that when our son Eitan went into Lebanon, so right before Sukkot, he was with his troops on Erev Sukkot, and this before they surrendered their phones, because they can't have phones in Lebanon, because the GPS will reveal their location, and that's not a smart thing to do. So they had to surrender their phones. But right before they went in, they were able to communicate with us. And I just asked him, I said, and Sukkot, you're going to have up there on the border? So he says, this year we have Ananei HaKavod. Our Sukkot are Ananei HaKavod. It was a really, really nice answer. To the point, mamash to the point. Kadosh Baruch Hu will be with them. That's all. They're not going to have bamboo sticks this year, you know. It's so the idea of Sukkot as Ananei HaKavod, protection, is the connection to Hanukkah. That without that kind of protection, we never would have vanquished the Greeks and the Hellenists and so on, and the Rabbim Biad Ma'atim. We were far outnumbered, and that's what we say in the Al Anisim of Bimei Matityahu Ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonayahu Banav. And we say, Rabbim bi'ad matim, Tmeim bi'ad ta'orim, and so on. You had to have a Kadosh Baruch Hu there, and it was miraculous. And that's why we say Al Anisim. It was miraculous, this Hanukkah story. But the miracle was an extension of the Ananei HaKavod from Chag HaSukkot. But that actually shows up in Halacha. Because you know that we light from 1 candle up to 8 candles, but that's only according to Beit Hillel, Mosif v'olech. But the flip side is the Beit Shammai. You start with 8 candles and you go down to 1 candle. Why so? So one of the reasons that the Gemara says is Keneged Parei Hechag. Parei Hechag means the parim, the ox, the korban of Sukkot, of the musaf of Sukkot, was measured by the number of parim on each given day in descending order. On day 1, it was 13 parim. On day 2, 12. Day 3, 11. And went down to the 7th day, there were 7. So if you quickly add up 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7, what's the answer? 70. So the Gemara says, Keneged Shivim Umota Olam. That's not that we're out for, God forbid, the extinction of the world. We're out for the extinction of the wrong ideas of what a Kadosh Baruch Hu was. We want, as Avraham Avinu was trying to teach the world monotheism and to understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu as we do, but the world divided itself into different beliefs. So we're asking for the descending order, the breakdown and the eradication of the erroneous beliefs, and that everybody should come to the same number 1, which is Shmini Atzeret, Par Echad. So that's the concept of the Keneged Parei HaChag. the descending order. And Beit Shammai said we should integrate that descending order of the korbanot of Sukkot to Hanukkah candles. So that's why he has 8 candles, 7 candles, 6 candles. And what would be the last candle? Number 1. If it ends with number 1 with the same number 1 as in the case of Shmini Atzeret, which ends with the number 1. So it's a beautiful idea. And the reason that we don't all remember this is because we do it like Beit Hillel. We do from 1 to 8. Beseder. But nevertheless, the Gemara gives us that halachic. That's already a halachic connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah. And then, of course, in the world of remez, allusions, in the Chumash itself, you have Vayikra Perak Kav Gimel, Parshat Emor, which talks about the Chagim. Ele Moadei Hashem Mikrei Kodesh Asher Tikru Otam B'Moadam. And you have the schedule of the Chagim in calendar order. After Shabbat is mentioned, you have Pesach, Sfirat HaOmer, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. And then it ends, Vaydaber Moshe et Modei Hashem B'nei Yisrael. End of chapter 23. And what happens after 23? You have 24, Perek Kav Daled. And what's in Perek Kav Daled? It begins, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, Tzavet B'nei Yisrael, V'ikhu elecha shemen zayet zach katit lamaor la'alot ner tamid, lighting the menorah in the Mishkan with pure olive oil. Now, the Bali Remez say this is an allusion to the next item on the calendar agenda after Sukkot is Hanukkah. Now, why would anybody think that this would be a Remez? Because it's superfluous. The identical pasuk already appears in the book of Shmot in Parshat Tetzaveh. Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Yisrael, v'yikhu elecha shemen zayet zach katit lamaor la'alot ner tamid. So what you have in Parshat Emor is a restatement of the exact same pasuk. V'yikhu elecha shemen zayet zach katit lamaor la'alot ner tamid. So they said the addition, the repetition, the redundancy comes to teach us an allusion to the continuation of the calendar, that after Sukkot there's going to be another Chag that's going to revolve around the oil, the menorah, and the mikdash, and so on, which obviously is Hanukkah. So you have here a calendar connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah. So therefore, I think it's appropriate to say something about the Hoshanas of Sukkot. So what does it say on Shabbat? What do we do on Shabbat? Number 1, we don't take the Arba Minim, and that you all know because of the famous Gzeira that we would not take a lulav and esrog on Shabbat because you might carry it. Gzeira Shema Yavirenu Dal Ramot B'Shut Rabim. The Gemara says the same thing for Shofar. We don't blow the Shofar for that reason, and also we don't read the Megillah this year. The Megillah comes out in the Yerushalayim on Shabbat Tedvav. We don't read the Megillah for the same reason. Now you can say, well, Erev. They didn't consider that all the places are going to have an Erev. That's the thing. The Erev thing didn't become popular until later in Jewish history. The halacha was there, but it was never like this idea that the cities and every place is going to have an Erev. When I deal with high school kids in this country, first time I have to tell them that you're not allowed to carry is when I take them to Poland. Because in Krakow there's no Erev. They've never experienced a place. So of course, before you go to the army, so there are places outside the bases. They might be situated in a place without an Erev, but in all likelihood they're in a scenario with a lot of carry because of bitachon reasons. So you have to teach them all these things. So here you have a poem that is read on Shabbat for Hoshanas. We open the Aron Kodesh. We don't do the traditional Hakafa because we don't have the Lulav and Esrog. And we just say the Om Nitzara Kevavat Hoshana, Bonenet Bidat Nefesh Mishivat Hoshana, Gomeret Ilchot Shabbat Hoshana, Doreshet Masot Shabbat Hoshana. Let's start from the top. Om Nitzara Kevavat. This line requires most probably the most explanation. Om is Uma. We have that poetry all the time. The hey is just deleted for poetic reasons, because sometimes for the meter, for the tempo of the poem, we have to take off one of the sounds. So the word Uma is contracted to Om. So Om here means nation. The nation. Natsur here means protected. There are different psukim in Tanakh to prove that Natsur means protected. Kivavat. And here, Kivavat requires more explanation because the idea comes from a pasuk in Parshat Ha'azinu, Yitzrenu ki ishon eino, and a pasuk in Zechariah, ki hanogea bachem nagea bevat eino. Bat Ayin, I know is a yishuv in Gush Etzion, but Bat Ayin actually means the pupil of one's eye, where actually light actually comes in. And the idea would be that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is watching us like a hawkeye, is watching us, is very, very focused on Am Yisrael. That's us, the nation. Now in the Torah it says, Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha ba merishit hashana v'ad acharit shana. Kadosh Baruch Hu is always concerned about us, but that has to do with Eretz Yisrael. There is a special shmirah, protection in Eretz Yisrael. Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha, constantly, consistently in Eretz Yisrael, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Om Nitzurah Kebabat. This is the nation that is being protected by the Bat Ayin, by the protected eye of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Bonenet Bidat Nefesh Mishivat. Now you're familiar with the pasuk, Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nefesh, or Nafesh, there it's the end of the pasuk. So what does it mean, Torah Hashem Tmima? The Torah is complete in the sense that it's wholesome, it has everything. Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nafesh. So let's try to translate. What does that mean? Torah Hashem Tmima. We know the song. What is Mishivat Nafesh? What do you want to say? Restoring. Okay. It also placates. It gives you tranquility. It gives you a certain amount of sanity and harmony and so on. A peaceful type of existence. It's supposed to take the stress out of life. So bonenet from the word bina, understanding. We are dealing not with a superficial understanding of the laws, that is the laws, but we are supposed to engage in in-depth understanding of the law, which is nefesh, which then soothes us. Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nafesh. Gomeret Hilchot Shabbat. What does that mean? What does Gomeret mean? You think it means complete? You have to complete the laws of Shabbat? Learning, very good. It's an Aramaic word, and that's why we call the Talmud Gemara. Gomer in Aramaic means to learn. So what's the difference between Bonenet Bidat, you are engaged in understanding the law, and Gomeret, you're also learning. It's almost duplication. One is Torah shebichtav, the written law. The dat means Torah. Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nafesh. It means the Chumash. It means to read the Chumash, to read the Torah, and then to read the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law that goes with it, the Midrash, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and so on. That's Gomeret Hilchot Shabbat. The laws, because if you look at the Chumash, you're not going to get Hilchot Shabbat. Most of the Hilchot Shabbat are just Torah Sheba'al Peh. The 39 primary melachot, only one is mentioned explicitly, and even that's a machloket. Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom Shabbat. You shouldn't transfer fire on Shabbat. So most of Chazal, and that's the accepted, is this is one of the 39. So 38 are derived from the construction of the Mishkan. That's why the idea of Shabbat is mentioned at the beginning of Parshat Vayakel, but 99.9% of the parsha has nothing to do with Shabbat. It has to do with building the Mishkan. So why is Shabbat thrown in as a type of preamble to that? To teach us that which is necessary for the construction of the Mishkan is prohibited on Shabbat. So that's Gomeret Hilchot Shabbat. One studies it on the realm of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. Doreshet Mas'ot Shabbat. This is all Aleph Bet now, so things are going to be a little out of order because the poet has to do this according to Aleph Bet. Now, who's the poet of Om Nitzurah? He's the same poet for the beginning of Hoshanas. The one person wrote all the Hoshanas that Ashkenazim say. Sfardim have different Hoshanas, okay? So Ashkenazim, when I say Ashkenazim, I mean Nusach Sfard also. When I say Sfaradim, I mean Eidot HaMizrach. It's completely different Hoshana. But who wrote these Hoshana is from 7th century, Rabbi Elazar Kalir, the most important, influential poet of that we know. Many of his poems are in our Kinot of Tisha B'Av. Many of his poems are in the Slichot for the various fast days. Rabbi Elazar Kalir. And I say 7th century because most historians believe he's from Eretz Yisrael, 7th century, which would be equivalent to the Geonic period in Bavel. It's after the Gemara already. There are hardly any Jews in Eretz Yisrael, but it's a skeleton in the north, in the Tveria area and in the Galil area. But that's where Jews are located in those days. It's in the Byzantine rule at the time, and he's there. There are some that want to attribute Rabbi Kalir, that he's actually Elazar Kalir, to a Rabbi Elazar from Dave's of the Mishnah, and there are those who want to place him later in the beginning of the Middle Ages, but those are long shots. There's just too much evidence that he's already around before the Middle Ages, and he wasn't around in the days of the Mishnah. So most people say he's 7th century Elazar Kalir, phenomenally important poet, well versed in every word of Tanakh, the language. He plays with the words, and he's a Talmud Chacham of tremendous repute, and you get it through all his poems as well. He knows the Halakha, he knows the Midrash, and Doreshet Mas'ot Shabbat. You're explaining the carrying on Shabbat. What's the minimal shi'ur? If you have a breadcrumb in your pocket and you walk out on the street in a place there's no Erev, that's not called carrying. There has to be a certain amount, a size, a volume. Just like with eating, we have kizayet, the measure of an olive for eating purposes. Here, there's another fruit volume. Let's say for eating on Yom Kippur, it's not a kizayet. For eat it, it's a date, kotevet agasa. It's a different measure. The shi'ur is not a kazayat. As a matter of fact, the Gemara tells us in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Hey, that you have 7 species of Eretz Yisrael: Eretz Chita, Sorah, Teina, Geffen, Verimon, Chita, Teina, Geffen, Verimon, Eretz Shemen Udvash. All of the 7 species are all used as shi'urim for different halacha, for measures, for different halacha. And don't ask me to repeat this because I don't remember it. Many, many years ago, I gave a whole drasha about the connections between each of the shiurim and that which is the application. I have it written down somewhere. But te'ena, the fig, which is known in the rabbinic language as grogeret, those who've studied Baba Metzia in Elam Metziot Shelo, the 2nd chapter, so there grogeret is mentioned several times. Te'enim, which is figs. So the volume of the fig is the volume of the minimum shi'ur of what's called carrying on Shabbat. If it's less than the size of a medium-sized fig, then it's not called carrying on Shabbat. So he says, Doreshet Masot Shabbat, to investigate the issue of carrying on Shabbat. Now, carrying Shabbat is most probably the malacha that most people might feel problematic because, okay, so they're not builders, they're not writing, and they're not doing most things, but no big deal to carry. I got something in my pocket. I remember once we had an Erev in Ramot, broke. There was a storm, whatever it was, and we told the kids, you can't carry on Shabbat, and one of my sons had something in his pocket, and he says, I'm not carrying it. So he didn't realize, nobody taught him that in the pocket is also called carrying. We have this also in Poland. Same thing. I have it in the pocket, or I have my jacket on my shoulder. Is that called carrying or not? These are not so simple things. I'm wearing my reading glasses, on top of my head. I'm walking out because I can't daven without the reading glasses, so I put it on the head. Is that called carrying or not? And then, of course, questions of hearing aids and other things. I'm not here the Pascha Shaila. I'm just saying that these questions were asked about Doreshet Mas'ot Shabbat. You have to investigate the issues of carrying on Shabbat. Hakovat alpayim tchum Shabbat. This is the letter Hey. Hakovat. So you see, he needed the Hey for something. He could have put the Hey before anything, right? That's the. Hakovat alpayim tchum Shabbat, establishing the measure, the distance outside the city limits that you're allowed to walk. So how much is 2,000 amot in kilometers? Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask the Chazon Ish, it's one thing. If you ask Reb Baruch Naeh, it's something else. Because they measure the amot somewhat differently, whether the tefach is with the thumb or the tefach is without the thumb. So the Chazon Ish's tefach is actually longer. Because if you make 10 tefachim, you're going to have, if you use the thumb, you're going to have more space to go than if you do the fist, which is the tefach, without the thumb. And that's going to be a question of how much is 10 amot and so on. So there's a big machloket. But it's approximately 1.6 kilometers outside a city is considered Tchum Shabbat. Now, is that biblical, the Tchum Shabbat, or is that rabbinic? What? My wife said that she's sitting in my shirt too long. Machloket. Machloket. That's all my students in Chashmonim, they know the answer. Machloket. Of course, a machloket. But how many ways? Well, it's either this or that. Wrong. It's three-way machloket. The big fundamental machloket is Tchum Shabbat d'oraita, biblical, at all, or is it the whole thing a rabbinic add-on? So that's one possibility. And then there's a possibility that it's biblical, but the shi'ur, the measure of 2,000, is rabbinic. But something much larger than that is biblical. And Chazal shrunk the distance. So let's just quickly review the views. In Parshat Bishalach, when man fell, the Torah says, Al yetzei ish mimkomo bayom hashvi'i. Don't leave your domicile, your place, on Shabbat to collect the man. Ramban says, that's not a mitzvah, that's a story. That's a narrative in Parshat Bishalach, and end of discussion. It has nothing to do with mitzvot. Ramban believes the entire concept of Tchum Shabbat and a 2,000 amot measure, 1.6 kilometers, is rabbinic. Fine, Ramban. Rambam has more than two opinions on this, but this you're going to have to read it in my book. So Rambam began with the same view as the Ramban. He believed it was rabbinic, but then changes his mind early in the game and says, no. The view that Tchum Shabbat is biblical is correct, and the biblical measure is 2,000 amot. That's his second view. His third view is, yes, Tchum Shabbat is biblical, doraita, but the measure is 24,000 amot, which means it's times 12 of the 2,000 amot. Times 12. That means you would be able to walk biblically almost 9 kilometers. Now, most people don't walk 9 kilometers. Maybe if you're in the end of Golani as a soldier, you're doing your last walk, and you're going to walk more than 9 kilometers. But most normal people are not walking 9 kilometers. I mean, to walk 1.6 kilometers, people do that. And they go to shul. A lot of places, they don't live near shul on Shabbat, and they walk 1.6 kilometers. That's doable if you're a healthy walker. But 24,000 amot, that's quite a walk. And the Rambam finally says that 2,000 is rabbinic. Where did he get the 24,000? From the Talmud Yerushalmi, who says that the 24,000, it's in rabbinic literature, it's called 12 mil. It's Keneged Machane Yisrael, the width of Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael moved forward, but there was a width, of the when they were in the desert, from one end to the other end was 24,000 amot. And because the laws of Shabbat are derived from Am Yisrael in the Mishkan in the desert, and the Mishkan was in the middle, and the distance was 24,000 amos from one end to the other, that, says the Talmud Yerushalmi, is the measure of Tchum Shabbat. And the Rambam ultimately adopts that. It's one of my cases where the Rambam upgraded because of the Yerushalmi, but he started out in a very, very low shita like the Ramban, but he never knew the Ramban. Ramban was older, was young, much younger than the Rambam. Ramban was born when the Rambam died, but they don't overlap. The Ramban and early Rambam believed that the Tchum Shabbat was rabbinic. Then the Rambam changes and said, no, it's biblical, but it's 2,000 amot. Happens to be the view of Rabbi Akiva. And the Rambam went with that. And then ultimately he went with the view of the Yerushalmi that says that it's biblical, but 2,000 is only rabbinic. It's 24,000 amot, that's the Oraita. So you see that when he says here, Hakovat Alpayim Tchum Shabbat, there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot between the letters and between the lines. Yeah. Okay, that's my, I don't want to do that now. Okay, that's each. I have a whole spiel. of that. Fine. Next, what's the vav? Umishivat regel mi Shabbat. So you're familiar with the pasuk in Yeshayahu? Im tashiv Shabbat raglecha. V'chotz chevtzecha midaber davar. There, Yeshayahu was talking about doing things differently on Shabbat. What we call in halachic jargon, uvda dechol, doing weekdayish things. Weekdayish things. Like the many Rabbanim said, when they finally prohibited, that's a story in itself, a historical story, of when they permitted the use of Shabbos clocks. At the beginning, they wanted to prohibit Shabbos clocks because it was no different than using a Shabbos goy. And basically you're not allowed to do it unless circumstances. But and a Shabbos clock gets the job done without you doing it. It's like asking a goy to do it for you. You get the job done without you doing it. The what? You're not asking anybody to do it, but Shabbos you're not allowed to do malacha. You're allowed to have malacha done for you. Is the whole basis of not asking a goy to do something for you for Shabbat. And a Shabbos clock gets something done for you on Shabbat. As a matter of fact, according to Beit Shammai, and thank God we don't hold like Beit Shammai, we would not be able to set a Shabbos clock on Friday. Okay, because Beit Shammai believes that you're now to do things on Friday that will trigger a malacha on Shabbat, even though you're sitting and eating your kugel on Shabbos. If you're doing nothing, but something happened. There, the Mishnah talks about setting a fish net on Friday, that the school of fish are coming by on Shabbat, and it's going to catch it on Shabbat. Beit Shammai says can't do that. Beit Hillel argues, says what I did on Friday is perfectly okay. And according to Beit Shammai, you wouldn't be able to set a Shabbos clock. But the idea of not doing things of uvda d'choil, so they always qualified with the Ramosha Feinstein believed that you can only use a Shabbos clock for lights. You can't use it for any other. But most poskim disagree with him. Says you can use them for everything else except television. Why? Why not? Same thing, television. Because it's uvda d'choil. That's not what you're supposed to be doing on Shabbat, sitting and watching TV. From the point of view of chashmal, of electricity, it's no different than an air conditioner or a heater or a light. It's a Shabbos clock. But from the point of view of what you're doing with that watching TV, so that you wouldn't be able to do. So Mishivat Regel b'Shabbat has something to do with not running on Shabbat. You're not allowed to run. You're allowed to run to shul, by the way. You're allowed to move. Otherwise, you're supposed to walk calmly. See, that's why my wife will testify. I walk fast during the week to show that when I walk slowly on Shabbos, it's no, she's disagreeing. She said I walk fast during Shabbos also. Okay. My slow is everybody else's fast. So it's their problem, not my problem. That's Mishivat Reva. Im Tashiv Shabbat Reglecha. V'zacho v'shamor mekayemet b'Shabbat. Right? That's Zohar and Shamor, the two, right? That the first two dibrot, the fourth diber of Parshat Yitro and Parshat V'etchanan, the two sets of dibrot. Chazal says Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad. That's a medrash in the Mechilta, Parshat Yitro, which teaches us an interesting halacha. Zachor is the mitzvah of Kiddush, by the way, Friday night, and Shamor is the big don'ts. Do not be on guard. Do not. And Chazal say that Kadosh Baruch Hu said Zachor and Shamor together to teach us that whoever is obligated in Shmirat Shabbat, not doing the malachot, is obligated in Zchirat Shabbat, which means women are obligated biblically in Kiddush Friday night, biblically. And a woman can say Kiddush to be mitzi a man, because it's identical obligation. And that's important to state, very important. Wherever there's identical obligation, so then a man can be mitzi a woman can be mitzi a man. Let's say Leila Seder, a woman has identical obligations in the positive mitzvot, even though Kiddush Friday night, Leila Seder are time-bound mitzvot asay shazman grama. Nevertheless, women are obligated. Women are obligated in Purim and Chanukah, without a doubt. With Purim, there's one view that says that women have a mitzvah of hearing the Megillah, and that means somebody's got to read it for them. And men have the obligation of Kriyat HaMegillah, reading the Megillah, mamish. So in that case, then a woman wouldn't be able to read for a man, but a woman would be able to read for a woman. That's for sure. But the Rambam argues, and Rambam says that it's identical, that the obligations for men and women for Purim are identical. And for Hanukkah, no one disagrees, that the mitzvah is on the household. And if a wife lights Hanukkah candles, the husband's not home yet, and so on, or maybe on a road trip and not going to be in a place to light, the wife can light for the whole family, and the husband fulfills his obligation, because the wife is equally obligated as part of the household to light Hanukkah candles. So this all stems from the concept of Zachor v'Shamor. You see, there's already a subject, an entire category, where even though it's a time-bound mitzvah, nevertheless, women are obligated. And it begins with the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbat. And then it says, Chasha lemaher bi'at Shabbat. Person is waiting with great anxiousness for the coming of Shabbat. Shabbat should enter. I mentioned already last week or the week before that the Yemenites would be with the talus and like sit and wait. Okay, the Rambam says that's what we're supposed to do. Most of us don't do that. I quoted the Rav who said that American Jews are Shomrei Shabbat, but guilty of Shomrei Erev Shabbat. Says because they go straight from the office to the shower and then they never make it to shul. Or if they make it to shul, the hair is still dripping. They're just not. There's no time. There's no time in many circumstances, societies, to fulfill this. Here in Eretz Yisrael, we understand what Erev Shabbos is in the afternoon. Everything's closed down already. It's really an atmosphere of Erev Shabbat here. Torachat kol mishishi l'Shabbat. You do all your things. You're busy. Torah means you're busy. Getting ready for Shabbat on Friday. Some people already begin on Wednesday, some on Thursday, but they're tzaddikim. But Erev Shabbos is the day of Kvod Shabbat. I have a proof, by the way, from Mishnah that Kvod Shabbat even extends till Thursday at least, because it says with regard to fast days in Eretz Yisrael for drought, for Atzirat Geshamim, there were certain droughts that was so extensive that they would fast for several days of Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday. That means 7 fast days spread out of Monday, Thursdays. And on Monday and on Thursday, and it included closing down the workplace and be engaged in tefillah from morning to night and fasting. But on Thursdays, they were allowed to open up the stands in the market because of Kvod Shabbat, because people had to buy things for Shabbos meals. So the phrase Kvod Shabbat in the Mishnah is used for a Yom Chamishi. It's there. It has so if you're doing your gefilte fish on Thursday, that's okay. You get credit. It's Kvod Shabbat. Yoshevet umamtenet ad klot Shabbat, and you wait, until Shabbos ends, but you're not in a hurry for Shabbos to end. I'm not sure I fulfill this all the time. People who sometimes look for the first Matzah Shabbos Ma'ariv, aren't exactly in fulfillment. I always notice in the Shtiblach in Katamon, so people finish davening, and then people are coming for the next minyan. Maybe a weeknight, people come for a later Ma'ariv. That's something very acceptable. But on Motzei Shabbat, to miss the Zman by 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour, or Rabbeinu Tam people who wait another 35 minutes anyway, and then come to Dav Ma'ariv. This is Yoshevet umamtenet at Klot Shabbat. They extend the Sudash Lishit and they're singing and so on. Kavod va'oneg kor'ah l'Shabbat. So these are 2 concepts mentioned in Yeshayahu. Okay, v'karata l'Shabbat oneg, v'likdosh Hashem mechubad. I remember the Rav explaining Yeshayahu didn't manufacture these concepts. The Rav believed that these ideas were known to Moshe Rabbeinu, taught to us at Sinai, and they were in the realm of halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They were oral traditions that beyond Zachor v'Shamor, that were biblical, Kavod and Oneg were oral traditions. When Yeshayahu talks about what will be in Acharit Yamim, and this is going to be revived, and that's going to be revived, and this and that, so he talks about Shabbat as one of the things that's really going to have an upgrade, and he says, and there will be Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat. What he's simply doing is stating things that were known already, but people are going to be careful with them, and careful to fulfill them, and so on. So Kavod Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat, the source in writing is Yeshayahu, but it's not the source halachically. The source halachically brings us back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Levush uksut mechalefet b'Shabbat. Change your garments on Shabbat. Means the idea of having Shabbos clothing. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. What if you only own 1 pair of shoes, right? So the queen from Philippines, she had more than 1 pair of shoes. Remember, she had about 600 pair of shoes. Right. Right. You don't need shoes? New shoes. You don't need Shabbos shoes? Rav Moshe thought you did need Shabbos shoes, and he said that if you only have 1 pair of shoes for Shabbos, shine them. Shine them. It's a truth in Rav Moshe. It's okay. I said it, dude. You know what? Yeah.
There was a family that was in the camps.
Yeah.
And what they did was every Friday before Shabbos, they wore their uniform, the striped pajamas, inside out all week.
Just to show that it was different. Yefem. That's very, very touching. That they put their show out garments upside, inside out, just to show they're doing something different. So levush uksut mechalefet b'Shabbat you have a nice dress, you have a nice shirt, and a new suit, a Shabbos suit, and so on. Beseder, a nice tie. Machal u'mishteh mechina l'Shabbat, right? You're going to have good meals on Shabbat. It's all prepared. Noam migadim man emet b'Shabbat. You're going to have delicacies, not just good food, but extras. For Shalosh Seudos, you're going to have good chocolate pudding, with cream. And you're going to go to Roladin for this Shabbos and get a 3-story high, sufganiyah that has, triple-decker whipped cream with chocolate slabs. I'm a big bucky. I don't touch this stuff. Too much sugar. Right. Yeah, that's stuff it's diabetes on rye. I mean, the Roladin. Of course, you understand why you eat the sufganiyot on Hanukkah, because you need 1 bottle of oil to prepare the batch, but when you squeeze it, usually 8 bottles of oil come out. It's miraculous. Every sufganiyah. Of course, in Chutz La'aretz we ate latkes, which people, it's here it's called livivot, but somebody once said that they went to Har Herzl once for a ceremony. He said, "Well, it's really nice. They serve latkes here." What do you mean latkes? There was a sign, latkes, litekes, litek to the ceremony, latkes, litekes, latkes, right? Right. It's the same person who said, "Wow, every house has a makolet." Really? It says makolet, miklat, has a makolet. What? Kafot latkes. Yeah. So that's so beseder. So you have noam migadim. You have very, very good delicacies and so on. Sudot shalosh mekayemet b'Shabbat. We observe. We eat 3 sudot. And now that's like an extra because people ate 2 sudot. And the Rambam tells us in Ilchot Deot that a person should eat 2 meals a day, and he believes that breakfast is the most important meal, and it's eaten at 10 in the morning. And he believed that the second meal should be eaten at about 4 in the afternoon. Some want to say that that's where the Rambam came up with his 6 hours between meals. So he had a 10 o'clock and a 4 o'clock, although he doesn't say that in the laws of basar b'chalav, meat and milk, where he says 6 hours, but he doesn't say 6 hours. He says kemo shesha'ot, around 6 hours, approximately 6 hours, which led to 3 views through 6 hours, 5 hours and 31 minutes, which means the majority of the 6th hour, and 5 hours and 1 minute, which is into the 6th hour. So all of the above are the 6-hour view of the Rambam. But he means Sudash Lishit is to have an extra meal. I mean, I grew up with the word Shalosh Seudos. Nobody ever explained that Shalosh Seudos is Shalosh Seudot. When you say it in that kind of Yiddishism, Shalosh Seudos, you don't get that this is Shalosh Seudot. It's one word, right? Shalosh Seudos. Are you eating Shalosh Seudos today? Yeah. So Sudash Lishit, we say here. There's even a 4th Suda, by the way, called Sudat Rab Chitka, that even have maybe a 4th Suda on Shabbat. Most of us don't do that, except if we nibble a little bit nash in the afternoon. We get that in. Malava de Malka is a different Suda. And Al shtei kikarot botzat b'Shabbat. We cut our bread, our whole bread. Kikar lechem means a whole bread, not sliced bread. You have to have 2 whole chalot on Shabbat. The idea of baking it, braided, was instituted to show that it's a special bread for Shabbat. That's why it was done. Because during the week they wouldn't braid the dough, but whoever was probably these are our great grandmothers who thought of this, that it should be built into the fabric of the baking, that this is Shabbos. Now we have other examples of baking into the fabric of the shape of the dough is going to tell us something. You ever notice that when you buy barekis, the cheese ones are triangles and the other ones are not triangles? That's done deliberately. There's right, and the chalavi, right? There was a whole thing about in Shulchan Aruch that we shouldn't eat milchik bread, bread that has a milk component in it, because you're going to slip and maybe have it for a fleishik meal, right? So in Shulchan Aruch it says that there were special breads that were baked for Shavuos, because Shavuos has the minhag of eating milchik chalavi that had a different shape, and people knew that these were milchik things. And I remember one of our teachers in Rebbe in YU, Rabbi Yosef Weif, taught Yeridea. he was against the packaged sliced white bread that came with hashgacha. It said chafkei dairy. Chafkei dairy, I remember. And he said that you can't use this because what the Rabbanim said was keep the package on the table so people can see that it's dairy bread. Just remember when margarine came out, there was those issue, you can use margarine, you had to have the wrapper on the table to show that it was parv. And coffee rich. Right. So I remember then there was this issue about these milchik breads that I grew up on those white breads. That many of them, so some were parv. Muffins, Thomas English muffins. So some of them were parv and some were milchik. The ones with onion in it, I think were chalavi. There was a chalavi, and that was funny because on the package it had a hamburger sandwich on it, and right. So, but the regular ones, I think they were parv, if not mistaken. The OU gives the hashgacha on it, and it says psada. So apparently the Rabbanim and the OU decided that you can't have a milk component in it, but it has to be packaged, it has to be labeled properly, and the labeling, would do the job. But the idea of a special baking of it, so the braiding of it, in Yiddish it's called geflochten, right? The braiding of it, so that would be showing that it's a special Shabbos challah, Shabbos baking, and some people would say l'shem mitzvat oneg Shabbat, but when they throw it into the oven, and so on. Yeah. Poretet arba rishuyot b'Shabbat. I think Al Anisim's going to wait till next week. Poretet arba rishuyot b'Shabbat. So I'm going to ask you to change the title, right, to Hoshanas l'Shabbat. That's going to be the title, Hoshanas l'Shabbat. Poretet arba rishuyot b'Shabbat, to go through the details of the 4 zones. Now, why would we pick out carrying? Carrying, we said something about carrying already at the beginning. The first Mishnah of Masechet Shabbat deals with this question, and already the Tosfot asked the question, why begin with the laws of Shabbat without even telling us that there are 39 malachot? And that appears, of all places, in the 7th chapter of Masechet Shabbat, Arba'im malachot chaser achat. And that's interesting in itself. Why did it say 39? It says 40 minus 1. In other words, you got to have to do the math to know that it's 39. The answer to that question is that 40 is what's called a typological number. It's a number that finds itself in the Torah from Parshat Noach until the end of we have 40 years, 40 days. That's there often in the Chumash and in Tanakh later. So because people had to remember things by heart, they tried to use numbers that they were familiar with. So 40 minus 1 is a more familiar term than 39. So it says, Arba'im malachot chaser achat, and it gives you the 39 malachot in chapter 7. Why chapter 7? Because it's chapter 7. That's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's idea. And guess where the Rambam gives us the list of the 39 malachot? You got it, in chapter 7. And where he follows the style of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the Mishnah. But the first chapter opens with Arba, where it says Rishiyot HaShabbat, Shtayim Shehein Arba. There are 4 different Yitziot. It begins with Yitziot HaShabbat. The word is Yitziot HaShabbat, Shtayim Shehein Arba. The word Rishiyot HaShabbat is a different version of that found on Dabbet in Masechet Shabbat, which was most probably the Makor. And it had to do with 4 zones. And the 4 zones were the Rishut HaRabim, the public zone, Rishut HaYachid, the private zone. And then there was an in-between, Carmelit, which was public but not as public. And then there was Makom P'tur, a complete off-limits, like inside a pipe. The reason you're allowed to flush a toilet on Shabbat, even though what goes out to Rishut HaRabim, because the pipe is too small to be considered an official zone. And therefore, it's not called carrying. You didn't do anything by doing that. That's the reason. I know in Bnei Brak, they don't like to flush the toilet either because they're tzaddikim. But there's no reason not to flush the toilet anywhere. It's a makom p'tor. So this idea of beginning with the Mishnah, Masechet Shabbat, with Arba Rishuyot or Arba Yitziot Shabbat, gave the kalir that we should give it a special shout out, a special mentioning. Poretet Arba Rishuyot b'Shabbat. And then there's Tzivui Hadlakat Ner Madleka b'Shabbat, the special idea of lighting Shabbos candles, which I believe I mentioned in the previous year, carries a double tag. It's Kvot Shabbat because it's prepared on Friday with other things we prepare on Shabbat. And it's Oneg Shabbat, it's something that we enjoy on Shabbat. So it's not like preparing food, which is Kvot Shabbat. Eating the food is something else. So that's enjoying the food on Shabbat. Here, the Hadlakat Nerot seems to be the same thing because you're lighting it on Friday. You can't light it on Shabbat. It's already Shabbat, but that's part of Kvod Shabbat. You're preparing it so that it should be available for Oneg Shabbat. And that's what led some of the poskim of the northern hemisphere, very northern, in the summer months, where it becomes so late, the beginning sundown, it's like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever, you can't, it's too late practically to begin Shabbat, and they would allow people to light earlier in the day without a bracha, and then as the Zman hit, would cover their eyes, make the bracha, and they're lit already, because that's what you do anyway, except from the time that you light and the time that you make the bracha, right? What do? We make the bracha, we light, we cover eyes, make the bracha. So when you remove your hands from the eyes, the candles are lit after the bracha. So what's the difference if it's 3 seconds or it's 3 hours? So that's basically was a solution, but it was an emergency crisis type of solution. So that's Hadlakat Nerot, and then Kiddush Hayom Mikadeshet b'Shabbat, the special mitzvah of Kiddush Friday night, which introduces the meals of Shabbat. The Rav once explained that without the bar pergofen before the meal, you can't eat your Shabbos meals, and that's why there's Kiddush in the morning as well. And according to the Rambam, and the Yemenites still do this till this very day, they begin Sudash Lishit with a cup of wine too. The same, it's like a morning Kiddush again, and it's not Kiddush, because Kiddush in the morning is not Kiddush. It's without Mekadesh Shabbat. We call it Kiddush, but the halacha doesn't really call it Kiddush. It's a bar pergofen, and I remember the Rav explaining this, and he said that the Rambam says that Kiddush in the morning is simply bar pergofen, and my grandfather, Rab Chaim from Brisk, that's what he did. And in front of 3,000 people, somebody yells out, says, and what does the Rav do? Because it sounds like something my grandfather. He said, well, I said the psukim, v'shomru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos, so, why? That sounded strange. He said, because it's printed in the benches. And everybody knew that wasn't an answer. Everybody, he got a good laugh out of that one. And then he says, don't you ever forget, I had 2 grandfathers. And that was very telling, because even though he was talking about his maternal grandfather, Reb Elia Feinstein, the uncle of Reb Moshe Feinstein, he grew up in that house as a baby, as a child, and that's the Kiddush he heard from Reb Elia Feinstein. That stuck, and that was it. Later he finds out that his Zayda and Brisk did it differently. So that was just for the shir. That wasn't for his Kiddush. Let's just wrap it up. Renan Sheva Mefalelet b'Shabbat. There's 7 brachot in the Shmon Esrei. After Pilul is Tefillah, Vayefalel. And Renan Sheva Mefalelet b'Shabbat. Our Tefillah on Shabbat is not the normal 18 or /19 brachot, but 7. Shiva bedat korah b'Shabbat. Here again, the Chumash. Dat means the Torah. We read 7 aliyot on Shabbat. Tanchilena liyom shekulo Shabbat. You remember the harachaman that we say in benching on Shabbat? Harachaman hu yanchilenu yom shekulo Shabbat. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu should allow us to arrive at the era where everything will be a type of Shabbat, obviously meaning Acharit HaYamim, the end of days. It's a great piyut for Shabbat, Sukkot, on the Hoshanas, to review Dinei Shabbat, and so on. Okay, Mirz Hashem next week. Should have a Chanukah Sameach, and next week we'll do the Hanerot Alalu and the Ma'os Tzur. Okay, בסדר.